internet.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get this live stream. I'm going to go ahead and admit everybody. All right, welcome everybody. We are so excited to have you join the Scandalaris Center and our 2021 fellows for our final event in the series of our fellow-led events. Today, we are focused on getting back to work in the entrepreneurial community, and our panel will be hosted by Joel Nelson, Cade Kelly, and Artorius Zhang. I'm going to hand it over to Cade to take us away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Jessica mentioned, my name is Cade, and I'm one of the 3 fellows in the St. Louis Entrepreneurial Fellowship Program in partnership with the Scandalaris Center that is speaking today. I'm joined today with Joel and Artorius, who are also members of the program, and we're excited to kick off our event called Getting Back to Work in the Entrepreneurial Community. It seems like we have a good mix of participants, so I'm excited to hear our audience and speakers interact and share some ideas across this topic. I know that the pandemic has been a large and relentless topic of many conversations over the past year or so. We're excited to shift that aspect of it and learn more from our panelists today about the lessons they have learned as entrepreneurs during the pandemic, steps they have taken, and how the community is moving forward. Speaking today, we have 3 founders from 3 different companies: Magnify Your Voice, Engagely, and Test Prep Toolbox. So here's just a brief agenda of today's panel. We'll briefly introduce the companies we're working for, then move on to our first topic of entrepreneurship during the pandemic. After a brief intro of this topic, including some figures on statistics on the pandemic and venture space, we will have everyone participate in a word cloud to collaborate on some ideas. And then after this, move on to a question and answer portion. We'll then move on to our second topic of getting back to the workforce. Again, this will include a brief introduction followed by a word cloud and then concluded with a question and answer session. During these question and answer sessions, they'll mostly be led by me, Artorius, and Joel. But if the audience has any questions, we will leave time at the end of those segments for you guys to ask those questions to our panelists. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have 3 panelists speaking today, each one of them being the founder of a venture that we are interning with this summer. From Magnify, we are joined with Mike Alvarez. From Engagely, we are joined with Shrikant Shalapa. And from Test Prep Toolbox, we are joined with Angelica Harris. All 3 of these ventures were started and based here in St. Louis, allowing them to speak from the perspective of an entrepreneur in the St. Louis ecosystem during the pandemic. To start off, the venture I am working with, Magnify Your Voice. Magnify is an online software platform that connects like-minded individuals to connect through civic, political, and environmental projects through online action networks. Representing Magnify, today we are joined with one of its co-founders, Mike Alvarez. Along with Betsy Sinclair, a WashU professor of political science, the 2 collaborated to start the venture back in 2018 with the goal to leverage the frontier of research and behavioral social science to help get civic goals met. This summer, I've been interning with Magnify as their community liaison. And in this position, I've taken on many roles within the venture, working as an intern coordinator, writing blog posts, and meeting with Magnify users in the St. Louis area to help best use the software to meet their goals. Thank you again, Mike, for joining us.
And now I'll introduce my venture host, who is not currently with us. We're having a myriad of technical difficulties. We had just moved into a new office, but it's Shrikant Shalapa, who is the co-founder of Engagely, which is a performance management software with a dedicated focus on the 3 pillars of engagement. 3 pillars: engagement, enablement, and execution, whereas we named the E3. Shrikant founded Engagely back in 2014, Artorius. Back in 2014, and since then, the performance management platform has grown into a worldwide company with many partners across the globe, having partnered with several big name organizations, both in the public and private sector. In doing so, Engagely remains at the forefront of the St. Louis entrepreneurial ecosystem. For my personal internship, I have specialized in marketing, working with the other execs of Engagely to really build out Engagely as a brand. My main project has been Engagely's yearly Top 100 Managers program, which is a yearly list project designed to highlight the top movers of HR in a variety of topics, from leadership development to employee acquisition.
And finally, it is my pleasure to introduce my founder, Angelica Harris. Being one of the former Scandalaria's Venture Competition Award recipient, Angelica Harris is the founder and CEO of Testprep Toolbox, a company that focuses on offering students superior SAT, ACT testing strategies, as well as college scholarship counseling with personalized components. Testprep Toolbox has been working with students across continental United States. Recently, Angelica has graduated from Washington University in St. Louis with the aim to continue her education in the graduate school in the field of computer science. During the summer, I had the pleasure to work with her in the field of marketing, human resources, and outreaching, writing newsletters, and supporting students in all various forms. Thank you so much for being here, Angelica. So here's our first section, entrepreneurship during the pandemic. So how is entrepreneurship during the pandemic, this challenging time in which social distancing persists? Besides the prevalent notion that companies are losing financial strength, researchers have found out that entrepreneurship continues to endure the challenge and experience growth instead. According to Peterson Institute for International Economics report, Americans started 4.4 million last year, with a distinct 24% increase from the year before. Additionally, the number of applications for starting businesses reached its all-time high with a 95% increase. These data certainly contradicts our impression. One of the primary reasons for this occurrence is the transfer of opportunity. The loss of potential customers from larger businesses give rise to numerous opportunities for startup founders. Quite surprising indeed. Throughout the ages, entrepreneurship continues to triumph even in such a time of troubles. Entrepreneurship during the pandemic continues to demonstrate its resilience and adaptability in challenging times. So here's our word call section. We would love to have the opportunity to get to know both our founders and our audience. Please use the link and instruction to share your thoughts. What would you use to define your experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic? We'll transfer the presentation to the word cloud, and please use the link in the chat to participate. Looking sharp, we have this difficult. It's very obvious. It's so true during this time that we're having this like remote learning, remote working, home and Zoom. They are a perfect example of like what we experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that's also very true for startup founders. I like how the home is. We have spent some time with our families during this time. Any more words coming up? Oh, scary.
I'm seeming to notice like a general trend of kind of negative connotations associated with the pandemic, which is quite obvious. But yeah, just to reflect on those times is definitely kind of a hard thing to do.
All right, I think we can move forward.
Yep, so I think it's time for us to go back to our presentation.
All right. And now we will begin the discussion section with our founders. Now we want this to be an open discussion where each founder provides their insights on each question, but in order to avoid possible confusion, we'll want to have a founder to just start us out to answer the first question to get the ball rolling. So for our first question, what do you think are some key takeaways as a business that you've learned during the pandemic? Mike, do you think you can start us out?
Yeah, so for magnify, I'll just use magnify instead of magnify your voice. I think that the biggest impact on us has been our inability to connect directly and in person with clients, and also to a certain extent to connect more directly with our advisors and investors and potential investors. Before the pandemic, we were at a moment where we were pivoting into what we hoped would be a period of very aggressive growth. And that basically ended because of the pandemic. And so we really had to just kind of double down and stay focused on kind of the core product that we were developing, and to kind of really make sure that we were servicing our current clients well and trying to build into those niches. So again, I think that the main lesson for us was really just focus. Trying to stay focused during this time. Very difficult for all of us to stay focused, and I can talk more about that, but I think that was the key lesson for us.
All right, thank you, thank you. Any thoughts, Angelica?
Yeah, so with Test Prep Toolbox, we were actually working with our students virtually. So the pandemic actually helped us out a lot because our students got more comfortable, learning virtually, and parents, felt more, were more acceptable to sign their students up for an online learning platform. But some key takeaway actually is, I think it's really easy to get caught in a bubble working remotely, especially if you're in a startup where there are only a few people within your own company. So we had to find new ways to outreach to customers. And I think we had to be a little bit more aggressive, just not being able to make face-to-face contact, and following up was really important. So yeah, I think that's some big things.
All great lessons. We'll move on to our second question. Either of you can jump in to answer this one first, but what has been the most challenging aspect of working at a startup during this pandemic? I know we talked about some of the lessons, but maybe some of those challenges that came with those lessons.
I'll let Angelica go first on that
one. What's really challenging? Like I said, I think actually it was working in a startup, connections are so important. Because in a startup, you're trying to sometimes you're trying to find new business partners. So it's important to attend networking events regularly. I actually found it easier to attend networking events virtually, because some really big networking events were only hosted in person pre-pandemic, but now they were they're hosted virtually. So, it was an even playing field for everyone to attend. So I felt like that was a boost, and it might actually be a little bit harder to attend many networking events, once things move back in person. So I don't know if that answers your question about a challenge. So yeah.
Well, I'll kind of, build off of that, because I think that, like I said earlier, that was a big challenge for Magnify. We work, as Kate can talk about too, we work directly with a lot of nonprofits. We work directly with a lot of educational institutions, especially universities. And, when you are trying to build a business and you're a new entrant and you've got some new and unusual kind of product, that the power of a face-to-face meeting, in particular, I have to tell you, one of my other co-founders, Betsy Sinclair, she really is the driving force behind Magnify, and she is a really electrifying personality to be around. She's got so much energy and enthusiasm, and she describes the power of Magnify in such an amazing way. But that's really done best in person, and it just doesn't translate quite the same way over Zoom. And I do think that's been a central difficulty. Another challenge for us is that we're also a kind of an unusual startup, in the sense that there's three co-founders. Betsy, who's a professor at WashU, I'm a professor at Caltech, and our third co-founder is Stu Bray. And I'm located in Southern California. Stu's located in Southern California. Betsy's located in St. Louis. And I actually had done a startup like this before, where we were all virtual. But with even with the technology, what was very difficult is that we also have day jobs, and so it became really hard for the co-founders and the leadership group to find the time in the day to get together because again, we were struggling with everything else that was going on, and still are, trying to juggle our other work commitments, Magnify, and everything that's going on in all of our personal lives. And I think that's been a central challenge for us. I don't think our leadership team has spent as much quality face time together, even using technology, as we did pre-pandemic.
I think that is so true. Having this lack of face time and have this lack of outreach into person is sometimes one of the biggest challenges we have in startups. So one of the questions for both of you is that for startups, they will have all of the startups that have different systems. So what's your thoughts? Like, what do you think they are the challenges that are unique to those startups due to the COVID pandemic, and how different types of startups receive different types of problems? And like, could you come up with something that can kind of generalize what they've been struggling and what they've been facing?
Mike, you can start off. I'm gonna take a second to think about this one.
Okay, so we'll just keep handing them off. That's great. Well, I think Angelica sounds like her startup is like ours. Okay, it's virtual already, right? By the nature of its product, we're not making anything. We're not making any physical product at Magnify. So to be honest, we have no physical facilities whatsoever. We have no offices. We have no physical infrastructure. Everything that we've done and the whole business model is set up on a virtual basis. And so, in coming into the pandemic, that was actually a strength of our business model, because, we were already set up. We were already meeting on Skype. We were already using Slack. We were, using GitHub for our development. We have a pretty strong pipeline for data and for also management of the business. So I think we were well set up for that. And so we didn't have a lot of the adjustments that I know that many of my friends who are working in other kinds of startups, in particular ones that are making things, right, or doing robotics or some other kind of physical product like that, the challenges that they faced, especially like in Southern California when things really closed down and closed down for very long periods of time. And so I think coming out of it, I think again that helps provide, we'll continue to use that foundation that we've only strengthened during the pandemic. And I think we have found ways, to be honest, to work with our interns and the people who are helping us build Magnify during the pandemic using technology. We've become more proficient and efficient at that, and that's going to continue. I think that's going to be one strength of Magnify, something that we've learned to do better during the pandemic.
Yeah. One thing that was definitely like a challenge during the pandemic is like, especially like working virtually, is making sure everyone's on the same board and understands the tasks that need to be done, because it's really, easy to waste resources when someone's working on this task, or, a lot of miscommunication can happen working virtually. So I think it's important for all businesses to set up like a sustainable, like virtual communication, system. It could be it's Slack or, but just a method where teams know how to stay on board. Like one thing that, right now I'm working on building out is using GitHub and laying out all the tasks of what the coders, what each coder needs to work on. So essentially just like, I think the in-person 9 a.m. meeting is like becoming outdated. So it's like important to have like some kind of system where each task is delegated and everyone on the team knows what each person is working on.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I absolutely understand the boon your business can have as a non-physical entity, with the pandemic where everyone's from home and has to work remotely. But as a question, perhaps we was talking to a business who is physical and a startup in that regard. Can you think of any ways that they can see a pandemic as a positive, a way they can grow and improve their own business?
Well, I think that most of my friends who work in the startup world who are in those kind of businesses and trying to, again, build physical products, build things, right? They learned a lot during the pandemic, and I think the lessons are very similar to the ones that we learned. And that is, how to be more efficient in this remote working environment, how to use technology to your advantage. And again, like Angelica was just describing, we use GitHub, we use Asana, we use Slack. They dragged me, to be honest, kicking and screaming into Asana. But once you learn how to use those tools and you build those tools into your workflow, whether you're making the product, whether you're in sales, or whether you're in startup leadership, I think you can become more efficient and more effective. There's a lot of savings, I think, that came to us in particular. We saved a lot of money during the pandemic because we didn't have to do a lot of physical things. And I'm guessing that a lot of startups that are in the same situation, where they've actually been able to pool their resources and perhaps use them more effectively because they haven't had to deploy them on office space, on all the things that have to happen when you're working in person. That said, I'd really love to be in a situation where we could deploy some of our resources and get together, right? Go to lunch, have coffees, do some of those kind of things that are so much fun about working in a startup. Especially when you're a co-founder. One of the things that's just really remarkable is working, with the people who are really developing these products and tools and things that we're using in Magnify. And it's so much fun to learn from them about what their experiences are and how we can be more effective in helping them, do what they do. We just haven't done enough of that. To be honest, I haven't spent a heck of a lot of FaceTime with Kate, right? And I think that's one of the major drawbacks of the situation that we've been in during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think excuse me. I think it's important to diversify a business like income stream. So and that will make that business less risky, in terms of if another pandemic comes along. So I know it's kind of hard to diversify the income stream for startups because most startups don't have a lot of cash on hand, but it's just always important to I think the pandemic taught us that we should always keep some cash aside, always think about the what ifs. I don't think anyone ever I guess some people predicted this kind of pandemic to come and last for this long. So yeah, just diversify and just be prepared for rainy days.
And I'll build on that for a second because you're absolutely right. And I think the way that we've seen it at Magnify is really just looking for new opportunities, right? And it's financial is one big part of it, but it's also for example, building out into this internship program. I don't think that pre-pandemic we would have been terribly interested in focusing on interns because interns are, in my experience in startups, they're hit or miss. But I think that we've really, this program is fantastic, and I think we've been able to get some really amazing interns working with us, especially over the last year. And again, that's an opportunity that I don't think we would have looked for before. And so being open-minded about new opportunities, and perhaps even taking pivots in your business, I think is important. So flexibility and diversification of funding, I think that's a great point.
Absolutely. I really like how we're talking both about the pros and cons of the pandemic, but also using the pandemic as kind of this forced learning experience, especially for startups. So thank you for bringing up, those are all great points. And then as Artorius was talking about earlier, this year saw a heavy rise in entrepreneurs and small businesses just because more people were at home and willing to invest that time and had the time to start their own ventures. So did you guys notice any rise in entrepreneurs within your venture fields, and how did that impact your ventures? Was there any collaboration, or did it just kind of stay the same this year?
Yeah. So, yeah, my company works along with this other, like college counseling company, and this counseling company has like definitely expanded its like online and constrained. Like now they're trying to do like add teachables and all this other things that were because they're finding that more students actually like to do college counseling virtually, particularly because they serve a lot of athletes. So yeah, I found that now like more businesses, especially within education, are trying to like just expand their technology and their online presence.
So what I think is going to be interesting down the road is to take a deeper dive into some of the data that you all have presented. I do know that there have been a lot of news reports about this burst of entrepreneurship. What I wonder is how much of that entrepreneurship is really centered around sole proprietorships, people who are really doing something individually versus those who are really trying to build a larger scale and more sustainable business. We'll just have to see what the data shows. So in our space, we've seen a dramatic increase in competition, right? And I don't mean competition in the sense that like, one-on-one cutthroat, we're all kind of going after the same market, but there are a lot of people who have built similar products to ours. And I think some of that started before the pandemic, because I think that there is especially in the US, there's an increasing desire among many to really try to do good things in our society. And I think we saw that before the pandemic, and I think we've seen that during the pandemic as well. So we have seen an increase, at least more. There's more visible companies kind of in our space right now. So far, it hasn't seemed to impact directly kind of on our business model, because again, we found a couple of very interesting and I think important niche areas to really target and to occupy at this point. But I think going forward, it is going to be interesting to see how many of these businesses that started during the pandemic will really become sustainable in the long term, because this is an important part of our economy. And really having entrepreneurship and having small businesses grow and be successful and sustain themselves is really important for our economy moving forward.
It is so interesting because what Angelica said is that during the pandemic, her partnership companies saw a lot of rise in revenue, like increase, and while you faced a lot of competitions. So what COVID experience is shifting our environment, shifting like the dynamic in entrepreneurship. So my question for you all would be, how has the pandemic bring any collaboration or opportunities for your venture?
To be honest, we've not thought about any collaborations at all. I mean, it's really just been a matter of really staying focused and trying to just keep the business moving forward. That has been our sole goal during the pandemic. I think that we've been in one sense we've been working much more closely with our clients than we were in the past, partly because the pandemic required that we do that, because it was harder to not be able to go meet with clients in person and to listen to them and understand what their needs are, so we could build out the Magnify application to suit their needs. So I think in that sense we've been more collaborative with our clients and worked more directly with them than I think we were doing in the past. But we haven't struck any collaborations or strategic partnerships with any other companies operating in our space.
Yeah, so I think, well, in terms of our business, like we were, like I said, operating virtually before the pandemic. So like having more students learn virtually, they were, like I said, more comfortable with online tutoring. And actually we're working on a software at the moment that that will actually do the training, the ACT training for the students. So I think like, students just being more accustomed. I know online schools have, their enrollment has increased drastically. So like I said, I think just like having more students comfortable online actually, makes us, helps us out a lot. In terms of, what was your second part of your question? I kind of forgot that.
Second part is the opportunities arise because when the environment shifts, there will be opportunities for collaboration. There will be also opportunities that arise from the pandemic.
Okay, yeah, just the software that we're working on is an opportunity that we think will be better off post-pandemic.
All right. Now we have one more question before we move on to the audience questions if they have any. But what advice would you have for individuals looking to enter the venture space, end of pandemic and post-pandemic moving forward?
Do it. I mean, to be honest, so, again, I'm a professor at Caltech, and I have lots of students who come up with lots of exciting ideas. And my advice to them always is run with it. Starting up a company is an incredible learning opportunity. It's an incredible experience. You learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot of valuable skills that you can transfer into pretty much anything you do. You learn how to manage, you learn how to, lead, you learn how to deal with money, you learn about taxes, you learn about, accounting, you learn all these different things. And I've done 3 startups now, and it's always been a great learning opportunity. So I always encourage people to jump into it. But my bottom line advice always is to first do the research about the about the marketplace that you think you're entering. Try to understand it before you take that first leap. But to also make sure that you get the right legal advice as well. The legal landscape for starting a business varies state by state, but it's really important from the get-go that you're setting everything up in the appropriate way, because it can be very difficult if you mess up, which we have done on occasion. Some of your basic founding documents or some of the ways you set your business up. Those can be very difficult mistakes down the road to reverse. So again, I always say do it, but make sure you're get a good lawyer. Make sure you're setting things up correctly, and enjoy the ride.
Yeah, those are great pieces of advice. I have a couple. One, I think it's important to be really aggressive, actually, when you first start off your venture. And I say that because I found that consumers are very conservative on how they spend their money. And so if you're starting if you have a brand new idea or this brand new product, you have to kind of push it onto consumers and really overly, sell it to, to sell it to consumers to spend their money with you. And yeah, so you just need to, and you always need to keep following up with consumers to, like I said, to change their mindset from purchasing with a traditional company and switch over to your company. And my second piece of advice is to leverage the St. Louis entrepreneurship community. St. Louis is a top city for starting starting a venture. So you're doing great, you're doing the right thing by, staying connected with Scandaliers, leverage some resources within Scandaliers, leverage some mentors, follow up with speakers. And that's a key, just follow up. You always want to, like I said, your connections is huge with in terms of a startup. A really good quote I read was, your network is your net worth. And I love that quote because it's just so true. it's all about who you know, who you can get in contact with, because that's how more doors open. So I just, encourage all of you to, like I said, leverage Scandalaris, leverage the wonderful St. Louis entrepreneurship community. And yeah, that's what I got.
Those are all great pieces of advice, and thank you so much for sharing that with all of us. Before we move on to our next section, we've talked a little bit about like taking that leap of faith and entering the venture space once you have that idea. But I think one thing that's really important is finding your niche as a startup. How have you guys noticed the pandemic has like shifted your niche as a startup, or has it kind of remained the same? So yeah, kind of startup niche and the pandemic. What are your thoughts there?
I'm gonna let Angelica answer that one first, because I think I've been dominating the conversation.
So I think it's a little bit hard for my business to say like our startup niche, because we're just, we're only like 3 years old. So, I mean, we kind of been working on the same. Well, I mean, I think we actually have a better focus though, because of the pandemic, like that we want to pursue this software and like invest our resources in it. Like I said, just because of like how much growth we've seen in online learning, and like our target, especially our target audience being, students that like really want to actually learn online. So I think that, I think we've gained better focus in this larger project we're working on. And what's the second part? I just keep forgetting.
I guess just like I think the pandemic has ushered in a lot of people to enter that venture space. And sometimes the pandemic has influenced people in finding their venture niche. So I guess just like how has the pandemic changed your niche as a startup, if it has at all?
No, I don't think it has. I think it just made us like more committed to this project.
Yeah, in some sense, I think we had the same experience. I think focus is a word that Angelica used, and it's a word that I've used too here. That the pandemic has really kind of led us to kind of double down and focus. One thing that we've been missing. So I don't remember exactly how long Magnify's been around, but we've been around a while. And to use one of those startup terms, we've pivoted a number of times. And we were, engaged in something of a pivot coming into the pandemic, which I think was fortuitous. And I think, Cade's been helping us implement that pivot over the course of your internship. But, the ideas for pivots for us largely come from meeting with our advisors and potential investors. We get an enormous amount of feedback every time we go into one of those pitch sessions, or we have various people who informally advise us. And when we talk to our investors, they're constantly criticizing us. They're giving us feedback. They're asking hard questions, and really keeping us, on our toes. And again, that's something that the pandemic, we've lost during the pandemic. We just have not had the ability to sit down one-on-one in person and really kind of dig down into the details about what we're doing. The technology just isn't really, doesn't enable those kind of conversations. And again, people have been really busy and preoccupied with lots of other things during the pandemic. And so, getting time from especially our informal advisors has been a huge casualty for our business during the pandemic.
Thank you so much for the answer. And one of the main things we are seeing during this pandemic is the shift of how we're going to work. For some companies, we're doing it remote. For some, we are doing like a mix between remote and in person. And for some, they're doing in person with a lot of caution. So the question will be this. So how do you envision any permanent changes to the way we consider commute 5 or 10 years after the pandemic?
So we're virtual and remote to begin with. So I don't think that what we've gone through during the pandemic for Magnify is really going to force us to change what we're doing. Some of the other startups that I had recent experience with, already were implementing lots of remote and work from home opportunities for their employees, and were already using technology in ways that enabled companies to be very geographically diverse, and I think that that trend started before the pandemic. So I don't want to attribute a lot of remote working to the pandemic, but that trend was already hitting a lot of industries, especially in the technology space, in particular in the area that I work on, which is data science and data analytics. And so again, I think that we saw those trends coming in. Companies were able to successfully use those technologies and kind of work approaches. And I think we'll see that continuing. At least I certainly hope so, because I think it's been challenging, but it's also been very efficient for a lot of people to be able to work remotely, to be able to work from home. But we do need to get back to a point where we can enable some face-to-face interactions and really get people back into, the workplace, also into places like professional conferences, and pitch meetings and meetings with VC groups. All of that, I'm looking forward to that part of the startup ecosystem, reemerging at some point soon.
Yeah. So yeah, Test Prep Toolbox, it was kind of, it's virtual, and it was virtual pre-pandemic. But I think that, just looking at other, I've been, reading about hearing about other people's experience who've actually had to work in the office. It seems like most people, since they've had the experience working from home, they prefer working from home or having some kind of hybrid option. So I think that will be long-term, where that, the traditional 9 to 5 in the office, 5 days, 5 days a week, that's, obsolete. I think now, looking forward, people, would want to have some kind of hybrid system. So that kind of like I said earlier, kind of sets, just means that companies need to look for, an efficient communication system. That's not all in person.
All right. Thank you very much. And we are a little pressed for time as it stands right now, so we are going to just rocket ahead into our next segment, which is getting back into the workforce. So if you have any questions, please save it for the very end. Now, in terms of getting back into the workforce, even with the Delta variant, things are looking up. As you can see, 90% of businesses have reopened in some capacity, and the employed labor market is returning in person, with remote work down up to 35% from May to June, which is the latest data we have. But that doesn't mean that all fears have been allayed. After all, most employees have said that they wanted a slow and gradual return to work, which according to a survey by the Morning Consult, up to 40% say they considered quitting outright if they were told, full stop to return to work. And of those currently unemployed, only around 10% consider the job search to be an urgent matter, mostly due to a fear of the virus and the botched reopening project, just putting themselves and their families at risk. So while the outlook is great, there are still challenges for some businesses to overcome. All right, so we're going to rocket right into questions as well, because once again, we are a bit pressed for time as it stands. So now that we have a good gauge of how the reopening process is looking currently, let's go on to the panel segment. And once again, I'll have to ask Mike to open this up. For the first question, what is the first step you think businesses should take if they want to reopen safely?
Well, I think the word there is safe, right? Again, magnify, since we're virtual and we're geographically distributed. The reopening is really not much of an issue for us at this point. But I do think that, from what I'm hearing from my friends who are in other kinds of companies, really trying to do it in a safe manner, reopen and get people back into the office, I think is the biggest struggle. And that, many companies have been working during the pandemic, and, they have to invest an enormous amount of resources. to do that. And I think they're going to have to grapple with issues like, who and when are people, who and which people are going to be working remotely and when. How are they going to maintain some separation while the Delta variant and the virus, the coronavirus, other variants are still circulating? They're going to have to grapple with masks, whether they're going to require them or not, or how that's going to work. The issues around vaccinations and mandating vaccinations, I think, are going to be issues for companies. So I think there's a lot of really complicated issues that are emerging right now. Luckily, Magnify, we don't have to deal with any of those.
What do you think, Angelica?
I think Mike's answer was great. So yeah, I think vaccination. Well, first of all, I think it's important for anyone in leadership to have a game plan going forward with how they're going to open up safely, and also just it's important to have a balance for the employees. Like, what do you mean balance? Like an option for employees, like a hybrid option, because now like it's some employees are dealing with like kids and whatnot, so they might need to like have like a day off or two during the weekday, which we didn't need during the pre-pandemic. So just like having a plan. Task Prep Toolbox doesn't have to deal with this. So I think Mike's answer was great on that one.
So since both of you guys kind of work in that virtual space and have been even pre-pandemic, I think I don't know if you would have anything to say on this, but like, what are some recommendations that you guys would have for employees as they return to in-person activities in the venture space?
So Kate, was it employees or employers?
You could do both, either employers or employees, just people really working in person in the startup ecosystem.
I think Angelica brought up one thing that I think is really important for employers, and that is have a plan. Again, since we don't have to deal with this at Magnify, we're not, really thinking too hard about it. But, when Angelica said that, that really resonated with me, that were I in a situation where we would have to start thinking about transitioning people back to a physical workplace, I do think that really mapping out a plan for how to do that, and communicating that effectively and transparently to your team would be important. I also think that probably listening a bit to your team and your employees at this point would be good, because again, the data that you showed, I've heard that repeatedly, and I have to tell you, my experience has been the same, that I've come to really enjoy having the opportunity to work remotely. There's some serious efficiencies, in particular in a place like Los Angeles, where if I don't have to commute to the office, I can save 60 or 90 minutes every day, right? That's time that I now have that I didn't have before if I don't have to physically commute. And so again, listening to what your employees, your team members, what their concerns are, and what they would like that transition path to look like, I think would be important were we thinking about transitioning back in person.
Yeah, I think it's important to to analyze the effectiveness of being remote. Just because remote, we know like companies can save so much money, and it's a startup that's super important to preserve cash. So I think like just when it's like analyze like your sales, pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and I guess like I can't really say now it's post-pandemic, but like just see, and like analyze like what your company was doing beforehand, and just try to find like that sweet spot of like where your company was doing its best, and from there I think looking forward, just to just like if you can work remotely and it's that's the best for your company, then I think you can go that route.
Thank you so much. So one of the questions that we have that is relates to something about morale. During the pandemic, a lot of people are working at home, and sometimes the environment is not good. We're doing social distancing. So what the questions for you all is, what do you think are some best ways employers can improve morale outside the office?
So what I've been seeing, I actually saw this the snippet on I can't remember what station it was, but they were showing how tech companies were like having different outings for their employees. Like they were going on ski trips together, biking trips. Like I think like having those like activities and trying to for just improve morale, like outside of the more serious work environment. Yeah. So I think like and then also like it kind of helps employees find like that nice like work-life balance.
So at one of the earlier startups that I did, we had a very strong in-person culture. We did have people working remotely, but we had a very strong in-person culture, and we did a lot of things together. We had a weekly game night. We would always, have birthday lunches, and we would routinely do various, kind of social activities, do philanthropic things in the community. We even got to a point where there were people on the team who basically would volunteer to kind of help coordinate these activities. And we had this elaborate system, online polling, like different options with things we can do. That all disappeared during the pandemic, right? And during the pandemic, at least at Magnify, again, we didn't have that kind of in-person culture before, but I think that what we really struggled with was just staying connected. In particular, the founders, we all had trouble staying connected. We had trouble staying connected with our team, and I think we've tried to find different ways to solve that. Just again by more frequent conversations on things like Skype and really using, especially Slack, to communicate. But there have been some really creative things that I've seen. For example, we haven't done this at Magnify, but a lot of organizations use Gather. Some of you may have done Gather. It's kind of a fun way to, engage in kind of social interactions online. Having things like game nights remotely, engaging in various kinds of kind of social activities using the technology. So there's been a lot of adaptation, but I think that moving forward, a lot of companies will continue to do a little bit of both. I think when people get back in the workplace, there'll be a lot of pressure for social activities, and that's one of the fun things that's associated with being in a startup, right? That's one of the ways you can really motivate your team in a physical startup where you're working together in person, is by a lot of the social engagement. And again, Magnify, we just aren't connected like that right now. But again, I do think that we'll see more use of technology to help foster those kind of connections in the future.
Definitely. And on that topic of these adaptations, do you see a lot of, working from home has really caught the eye of many workers from around the world. A lot of elect to just want to stay home permanently. Do you see like these changes to this work-life balance and maybe even a hybrid model being just the permanent new normal for, to fulfill the foreseeable future, maybe 5-10 years after the pandemic?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that like this will probably be, I think like more of like a hybrid model is what like will be a nice balance. Because like I said, there are gonna be like a lot of miscommunication working remotely. So, especially, employees who have, kids at home. I think I've seen like surveys where like they actually prefer like the hybrid model or just all remote.
Yeah, I hope we continue with something like a hybrid model. I do think, as Angelica said, there are a lot of people who have come to enjoy the opportunity to work from home and take advantage of the flexibility that brings. And there's other side effects too. I've seen, there was a study recently in one of the academic journals that I read that talked about the enormous environmental impact that not having in-person academic conferences could achieve. In particular, focusing on how moving to a hybrid model for conferences and for supplementing a lot of that travel that we all used to do, can really lead to a lot of environmental savings. And I think that's one other aspect of moving to a hybrid model that I think needs further discussion and examination. But that said, there is, as you all know, there's a lot of pressure for us all to get back together again. It is nice to be able to see people in person. It's nice to be able to talk to clients and potential funders in person, especially when we have an electrifying co-founder like Betsy Sinclair. I don't have the electricity and energy that Betsy provides, but she gets into a room with investors and she really knows how to communicate effectively with them, and it's something else when you can have that kind of energy in a room. It just doesn't work remotely. So again, I think hybrid is going to probably be the model moving forward. There's a lot of upside to it.
Great. Before we move on to a last couple of questions that we will have specifically for the ventures, I want to just make it known again to the audience that if you guys have any questions, please raise your hands and ask those to our panelists. But one last question that I have for you guys is like, how do you think the pandemic has changed the way you see yourself as an entrepreneur?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. That's why I was waiting for Angelica to go first, because I'm looking forward to hearing what she'll say. In a pandemic, leading any kind of organization, be it a startup or like a research group like I lead at Caltech, moving everything, shifting everything to a truly remote working environment requires a lot of shifting of management leadership. Now, again, we didn't need to experience a lot of that with Magnify because we were already operating on that kind of virtual remote kind of business model. But I think for a lot of us who've done this in other contexts, learned a lot about management and leadership. It's especially on the leadership side, I think it's been very important to try to be a good positive role model for the team, to try to maintain positivity. I mean, a lot of people have gone through a lot of crisis, and I think that really trying to help members of your team, members of your business, members of your organization, work through that, give them the flexibility and space they need, but also give them the support. I think that's been one of the key things that I've learned personally. And hopefully it's the sort of lessons that, I'll be able to carry forward, in terms of my own leadership and management styles, as we hopefully start to move out of this pandemic.
Those are all great takeaways. Again, sorry, I apologize for the tricky question, but Angelica, if you have anything you would like to share, please go ahead.
This is a really tricky question. That's why I was just thinking but I think like really like ways I feel like I've grown is that I had to find like new ways to organize, like remain organized, especially with our students. Just because like now since everything's on your computer, like I just have like a billion tabs open at one time. So just like trying to make sure, remaining organized, and that like not missing, but also like maintaining good customer service. So that's kind of like been something that, my company had to adjust to and find new ways to respond back to like potential customers quickly. So yeah, organization and just like being flexible to like, the changing environment. So
Thank you so much for your answer. And we now are going to move to the directed questions where we'll be asking questions for specific founders. So my question will be for Angelica about her test prep toolbox. So when we are dealing with students, they're all different. So sometimes same technique won't work for all students. So in your experience, what are the most challenging part about offering assistance to students and adjusting based on their strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah. So right, like all students are different learners, and I think that's where we found that that's where like we're trying to build out our product is the software that we're developing. So the software will personalize the ACT and SAT test prep training. So typically with traditional companies, they'll just provide like the one test book and just the generic ACT class. But I'm pretty sure some of you guys are familiar with. So yeah, that's where our software comes in. Right now, we're just doing live tutoring because our software is not completed. But what we hope is to use AI to direct specific to personalize the training for students. So as they practice on our software, the algorithm learns and they get new problems, and while still using our groundbreaking test prep strategies.
Great. And then a more directed question for Mike about Magnify. What types of, I always like to ask Betsy about like exciting projects that she's noticing on Magnify. So I'm just curious, what type of projects did you like find on Magnify that you had not seen prior to the pandemic, like with it being this online action network space?
Well, what we're seeing a lot of interesting projects because we're actually expanding out, as you know, Kate, to a number of organizations. And some of the things that part of the pivot here that we've been going through for the last year, has also been working more directly and trying to bring in to Magnify universities. And what we're seeing is just a lot of interesting and innovative ways that universities and also student leaders at universities are using Magnify. This was, I'll kind of go back and I think this was an earlier question about, did the pandemic open up new opportunities for us? And Betsy and I in particular talked quite a bit about this because, we wanted to see if there weren't ways we could help our clients use Magnify during the pandemic, but we also didn't want to, really take advantage of this complete disaster that was, unfolding right before our eyes, because that just seemed, wrong for us from an ethical perspective. But what we are seeing is that, again, a lot of universities that are using Magnify, students are having trouble connecting, right? Now, you all probably have experienced this yourselves, right? You've lost track of or lost the ability to connect with your friends and people in your classes and organizations that you're involved in. So we're seeing a lot of activity on that front, and it's very exciting to actually see the growth. In fact, I just what happens when there's a new project in Magnify, it pops into one of the co-founders' inboxes so that we can approve it. And as we were just talking, a couple of these new projects just popped into my inbox. And so that's a growth that we hope to see continue post-pandemic, that we hope that, especially universities can help, we can help them use this product to really build stronger connections between students themselves, between students and students and organizations.
Apologies for the presentation. So my question will be directed to Angelica again, and this question will be in regards to student-teacher interaction. So during the pandemic, you see a lot of students are sent back home because of the virus. And in your thoughts, what's your vision for the future in regards to student-teacher interaction? Would there be some remote aspect, or would there be a hybrid, or something that's besides school education? Or how about tutoring? How will this alter tutoring, and what's your vision about those kind of circumstances?
Yeah, I think that there will be, I think there will always be like, the in-person option, because some students just need in-person. And I think that there'll be, I think like, there'll just be more options available for students. And I think the online option just will become it has enhanced during the pandemic. So yeah, I think like, and also just like, I found that, because I was a student athlete like while I was in high school. So that's like our target audience. And I actually did online school for my last 2 years because I was so busy playing my sport. So I think that definitely like online learning, like actually as sports and like pretty much all extracurriculars have gone more competitive, and like receiving those athletic scholarships or like whatever, extracurricular scholarships for college has gone more competitive. I think the online learning, that, that homeschooling area, as we've seen, has expanded during the pandemic. And like, I think it'll actually continue to expand just as things get more, like I said, more competitive.
Great. Thank you, Angelica. Again, if the audience has any questions, feel free to ask those now. If not, I think we're going to wrap up our panel. But I just want to echo a lot of the key points that were made today, and thank the panelists for being here. But I think a lot of the three big takeaways that I learned were focus, organization, and reflection is definitely three big things that we need to focus on post-pandemic. But thank you so much for joining us. And thank you again to the founders for coming. I know that you guys have very busy schedules working in startups, so this is a very big ask. So thank you again. I'm going to ask the founders if you're interested to put your emails in the chat. So if anyone from the audience wants to keep in contact or has any follow-up questions following today's panel, they can do so. But thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, Cade. Great job, everyone. Thank you so much to Mike and Angelica for your time. If you want to keep up with what the Scandalaria Center is doing, we have some upcoming events. Tomorrow, you can support a WashU team in University Pitch Madness. It's a pitch competition. We'll be joining in to cheer on our WashU team. Also tomorrow, Balsa is putting on a professional development workshop on running an inclusive meeting. So very timely topic. So feel free to join in on that as well. And then on August 5th, there will be a workshop on top tips for funding research and development with grants. So we continue on with our lineup of virtual events. We do hope to be in person soon, but thank you to everyone for joining us today. Have a great rest of the day.